A moment of significant change or a turning point, altering your course, is known as an inflection point. In business, these moments have a significant impact in many ways. That's why we're speaking with leaders from across the asset management industry to hear the stories of their inflection points and the impact they've had on their journeys. Join me and my colleague Mark Spina as we explore the business of being in business, with insights that can help you wherever you may find yourself. This is Inflection Points.
Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Spina, President and COO at Flex Networks. I am also the co-host of Inflection Points. Today, I am joined by Jack Sharry. For those of you who don't know Jack, many of you do, Jack has been a financial industry innovator, collaborator, and advocate for 40 plus years. He served as an executive at Morgan Stanley, Putnam, Virtus Investment Partners, and now he's at LifeYield, where he leads sales, marketing, product development, and distribution strategy. In addition to that, he co-chairs the Money Management Institute, MMI's digital advice community, and hosts one of my favorite podcasts that I was fortunate enough to be a guest on recently. That podcast is WealthTech on Deck, where he talks with other industry leaders on their tech strategy designed to improve investor and advisor outcomes. If you haven't bookmarked WealthTech on Deck, we strongly recommend you do that alongside of Inflection Points.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. There's probably a couple things, but we'll probably cover them over the course of our conversation. Another thing, I'm involved with friending Tom and Steve Gresham's active with the next chapter. So I spent a fair amount of time on that, including the Leadership in Action program, which I co-chair with Cheryl Nash. So much more than that, but that's another fun thing, another fun project that I found some time for.
So Jack, we jump in at the beginning of the episode to this grand background that you have and kind of all the different connection points you have into the industry. You and I think met way back through the MMI. We've both been active participants in that space. We've both been active participants in the asset management space. We've both migrated into the Fintech space. So you're ahead of me, but we're living in some ways parallel existences. Before we got into these professions, though, that we've each had, and we've all had formative, what we think of on the show as inflection points. I've read a book you've published. I've listened to your podcast, as I mentioned. So I know you've got a number of different inflection points. What would you say were some of the most important inflection points that led you towards or away from different career choices? And that could be friends, family, schooling, activities, or adventures. You pick.
Yeah. So I'll start with working at a sporting goods store where I was hired to sweep the floor and send packages back to the factory that were defective or whatever. And I was also a swimmer and diver and knew a lot of the coaches in the area. Short story, we went from 9 teams that bought their swimming suits at this store to 50 and being the second largest seller of racing bathing suits in the US, and still sweeping the floor. In fact, one time when I was sweeping the floor and I'd send letters out to all these coaches, the coach said, "Is Mr. Sharry in?" And I put my broom down and said, "I'm Mr. Sharry." I'm, of course, all of 16 at the time. So that was formative for sure. Fast forward, so the next gig was I taught tennis and diving. I was a diver and a tennis player of some skill way back when, and coached tennis, coached diving, kids that went on to get scholarships in both sports in college, and had giant programs. I learned about herding cats and bringing people together around a program. So something that stood me in good stead, and later went on to do that professionally. I actually taught at an indoor and outdoor tennis club. And all that was in line with becoming a wholesaler, believe it or not. And as it turns out, the company that I worked for first was an annuity wholesaler, no longer around, but they probably have 100 different executives in our industry that started this company called Security First Group. And basically they hired people like me that may not have known anything. They preferred it actually if you didn't know anything about the financial services business. And they taught us basically how to communicate. And because I had a background in teaching tennis, a complex undertaking for sure, then if I could that simple, then they'd love guys like me. There were people like me that did that. Started as a wholesaler, used my tennis teaching skills to talk about tax deferred annuities. And that led to a role later at what team winner now Morgan Stanley, and later became national sales manager there. After that, Putnam national sales manager and head of marketing. and then on to Phoenix Investment Partners, which is now Vertus. So it was an evolution of basically making the complex simple, helping people understand how to do something and have some fun. Something I've done my whole career. I'm doing it again here at LifeYield, where we're taking a complex topic, making it simple for people to improve financial outcomes.
Let's explore a bit. You've got to elaborate on the floor sweeper to the top seller. How did that happen?
I didn't know what I was doing, and I just knew a bunch of people, and I was a scared and friendly kid. So I just reached out to friends and understood networking before there was such a term. This is way back when. And just tried hard. I was looking for a 10-cent raise, and I was making $1.55 an hour, and I wanted a $1.65. And I told my boss, if I go from 9 teams to 15 teams or whatever, I said, I forget the exact number,
The more.
10-cent raise. And sure enough, I did. And we became one of the biggest sellers. But in any event, it just early on, it was just pure naivete and energy and excitement and fear, to be honest. But probably the big turning point, and I write about this in the book because it was in 1983. I was a newly minted wholesaler. I had no idea how to sell or talk or listen or anything. And basically what I did is I went to the sales course where it was about listening and about storytelling. And that's really the title of the book, is about authentic and ethical persuasion, about telling, committed listening and authentic storytelling. In fact, as we record this, I'm about to post a LinkedIn post on that topic. Last month it was listening. This coming month will be on storytelling. But that turning point was I learned a good bit and wrote about it in the book about listening and engaging with people. And I ask a lot of questions. I'm really interested. I remember what people tell me, but I do that literally every day. I'm talking to people like you and people all over the industry. So when you talk to 5 to 10 executives, leaders in our industry every week, and they tell you stuff, and then you start to put it together, basically you get pretty smart just by asking questions and finding what people are up to and making connections. So when I'm on the call, I think you found this to be the case, I have something to share that's worthwhile hearing. So guess what? You take my call, and there's a whole lot of others that do the same. So if I were to give you my secret, that is the secret to my success. I know how to listen. I know how to tell stories based on what I'm hearing.
And you connect the dots in between. I think that's where the real magic happens, right? Because you could have great listeners, you could have great storytellers, but arguably the hardest part is to connect the listening to the story. There's this space in between,
Totally.
and you do that by connecting dots.
It's one thing to listen, but then you got to do something about it. So it what I call advances the discourse, advances the cause, yours and mine. Because if I advance yours and my cause, I find tends to be advanced as well. So it's a win-win. And when I find, and frankly, I've been fortunate enough, much like you, I've got a lot of friends in the industry because I'm all about their success. And when I help them succeed, they're rooting for me too. And guess what? We get to do business together. We like each other. We have fun. We do good, make the world a better place. Peace, love, and understanding.
Let's jump in another question or idea here, Jack. So we're already in the professional realm. Like, who were some of the people that, or what were some of the precursor inflection points you've experienced? I imagine with the sporting connections, maybe coaches, but then early on, particular colleagues, mentors, managers, anybody who's helped make Jack Sharry who he is today.
3, Dr. Fernando Flores. He was the person I took the class from way back in 83. He was at the age of 27. He was the finance minister of Chile, wound up running the country. It was a socialist country at the time, and then was taken over by a right-wing fascist who threw him in jail, tortured him. Anyway, he was the one that taught me about committed listening and less about the storytelling, more about the committed listening. So he's one for sure. That's at the heart of what I do. And then my first manager as a wholesaler, I was a 30-year-old rookie, had no clue on how to sell or talk, or just scared to death, frankly. And George Clary's his name, no longer with us, sadly. But George basically at my first visit when he was riding shotgun, as we called it back in the day, riding shotgun with
I remember that, of course.
I've done plenty on both sides. In any event, we went to it was a Payne Weber office, Hartford, Connecticut. It would have been 83 or 4. And I spent the morning just talking my fool head off, handing out brochures. No clue whether anyone was listening on the other side. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, I am just dazzled by boss on how I talk good. I thought selling was talking good. And we go to lunch. He says, so tell me, what'd you learn today? And I thought, geez, can't think of anything. And so after stumbling and fumbling, I finally had to admit, I can't think of anything. He said, you got to ask questions if you're going to learn something. you didn't ask one question today. He was very kind and gentle, but it really was a punch in the gut. He gave me a homework assignment, which I give to students that I teach. And that is to go home the first hour of each night for the following week. I was to ask questions of my wife, not make a declarative statement. And 5 minutes into that, my wife said, "Why are you asking me so many questions?" And I had to think quick. I said, "What do you ask?" And so that took us another 30 seconds or so before she said, no, why are you asking? And I admitted what happened. And she said, "Yeah, your boss is right. You talk too much." And that was the turning point in my life, frankly, because it became clear I didn't know anything about engaging with people.
Wow.
And it's really been the hallmark. One last mentor, key person in my life along these lines is a guy named Norton Linjord. Again, sadly passed away. He was fought in Vietnam and succumbed to Agent Orange down the road. But he was my mentor in wholesaling, and he was a storyteller without peer. Give you a sense, we had 80 wholesalers at the time. He was number one and had twice the number of sales as the number two person. So he knew how to sell stuff. And what he did is he just gave seminars, and he was just a Pied Piper par excellence. And he would just tell stories, and people would just sort of follow along and literally line up after his seminars with their checkbook in hand and ask who would make the check out to. Literally. I'd never seen it before or since, but he taught me the power of telling compelling stories by talking about what people are looking to achieve and how they can go about it, but in a almost musical, beautiful way where you just were fascinated by his stories. So those are a few of the folks that have had real impact.
Great collection of kind of inspirational people and thinking. I know, Jack, as we put this together, I don't think I knew it at the time, but you did something very innovative at Phoenix, right? So let's go from people to processes, right? You had an inflection point, I think, of a learning of a sales process. You introduced something totally new into the industry that many others, including me and my firm, followed. I didn't know at the time I was following Jack Sharry, but now I do. It's funny to put the pieces together. Tell us about what that finding was, what the process change was, and the inflection point and what it did for the company.
Yeah, it's really applying this listening thing I talk about in a very precise way. So I'll break it down because for people who get this, I tripped over it. I just learned it the hard way by trial and error, like most of my best ideas. But basically, when I went to Phoenix Investment Partners, it was a mutual fund company with one fund, the growth fund, which was the number two fund, the Fidelity Magellan in the 80s. And all the money went there, and then it underperformed and all the money left. So I came in, joined from Putnam with the idea we're going to build and buy and build a powerhouse. And today that powerhouse is called Veritas Investment Partners, but the predecessor was Phoenix Funds, later Phoenix Investment Partners. And so we came in, basically we had to do a lot. So we hired a bunch of boutique managers. So names you will recall, Seneca and Engelman and Duff and Phelps,
Sure.
and a bunch more. So we had, I think, 11 different, we were the first multi-manager distributor. We owned them and then owned the various managers that we represented. And one of the people we acquired through acquisition or joined us through acquisition, a guy named Durkar, used to do these bubble charts on a legal pad. He would do using the Morningstar bubble charts. He would draw them on the page, growth and value and small, mid cap, large, all that stuff. And so what we did is we just applied technology to it, very rudimentary at the time. And we did what we called the bubble charts. The name was complementary investment analysis. It's a 2-page form. It was offered up by our sales desk. And basically what we did is we plotted all the managers in the, at the time, Payne Webber later UBS program and the Merrill program and the Morgan Stanley program, all the programs, all the advisory programs. And we plotted all the managers, not just our own. And over time, what we would do is we would plot our managers with other managers. I think I forget if you were at Regent or you were at Regent and maybe Boya. But anyway, we would pick the managers and then of course we picked our own. So we'd have 5 bubbles, 3 of ours and 2 of somebody else's. And we put together a risk adjusted return over the prior 10 years. And we show how it would have done. And we were doing 4,000 of these illustrations a month, all from our sales desk. And interestingly, what we did is we had 7 different national sales managers, and I think you were one of them, who came into our office, spoke to our sales desk. These are the young folks with the headsets who are not, basically they're helping wholesalers sell more stuff, and that's their job. but we had these complementary investment analysis, which everyone in the industry later copied. And we basically, where it started, I left this part out. This is so important. If you remember Dave Ferrier and Alan Sislin were running the Merrill program. We had at Phoenix Investment Partners at the time, we spent $500 million buying managers. And when I went in to show Dave, I was full of myself and telling Dave Ferrier I'd come from Putnam.
For the audience, they should be thinking about gatekeepers to the Merrill system, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Senior people running the program, Dave being the what's the word?
Due diligence, right?
Being head of due diligence. And Ferrier basically didn't like that I came from a mutual fund company because at the time, mutual funds were the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And he wagged his finger at me and he said, I don't think this is going to work, this selling multi-managers. This is before the complementary investment analysis. This is what led to it. So I don't like what you're doing with this multi-manager thing. I don't think it's going to work. And when it doesn't, we're going to fire you. So we had just spent $500 million acquiring managers to put them all together. And that's where we developed this complementary investment analysis. Turns out I was later invited to speak to all the other managers about how to market and sell at the Merrill system, along with John Stewart, who's now at Calvert. Basically what we did is we talked about the new way of operating. So the key point there in terms of talking about process, and I've done this at LifeYield, I've done this at other places, is I keep listening. This listening thing is more than just hearing. I'm listening for opportunity. And basically what I heard loud and clear from Dave Ferrier is you got to show a way to add value to what you're doing with all these managers than just sell a bunch of managers. Just sell the hot dots at the time, which frankly was the habit still is to a large degree. But the point is that what I was doing was I was demonstrating value that included not just our stuff, but other people's stuff. And they ended up loving and doing it themselves. They copied it. Of course, that's the highest form of flattery. But I want to dig into that listening thing. I listened for opportunity. I listened that the average number of accounts at the time was 1.2 at Merrill. In other words, they were talking about having a diversified portfolio. Didn't happen. Hot dots were being sold back then. And I'd say this was a breakthrough to selling multiple managers in a smart way.
Yeah. So while in some ways this is an entertaining stroll down memory lane for us, right? As I listen to you, I think of it as enduring concepts and principles and ways to approach work that are highly relevant today, as are more relevant to today. So let's use that as a platform to race forward, Jack, from the early 2000s to 2022. You're now at LifeYield. Tell us about what took you from, let's do this. What took you from asset management to LifeYield and Fintech? What was the inflection point, the driver to bring you into this space?
So one of the founders of LifeYield is a guy named Paul Samuelson. His father was the Nobel laureate. Paul's a brilliant guy. And he and I were on a board together at camp our kids went to, Camp Beck at Chimney Corners. And so we got to know each other a little bit. And he was cooking up an idea with the other two co-founders of LifeYield at the time. I knew Paul and didn't know the other guys. And he came to me to show me the idea. I was at Phoenix at the time. And so what do you think of this? I said, I thought of this 3 years ago and quickly figured out it was way too complicated for me to figure out how to do, which is how do you maximize retirement income through multiple accounts and through tax optimization? That's Paul, who's brilliant and writes all of our algorithms. He was the one that had cooked that up, showed me the idea. I said, that's great. I said, let's keep in touch. I think what you're onto is the future of wealth management. Long story short, I joined the company as an advisor initially. And I remember my first call was to some old friends of ours, Mark Brookman and Roger Paradiso. They were at whatever it was called at the time.
Smith Barney, probably.
Yeah, Smith Barney, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, or whatever the names were at the time. They were part of Citigroup at the time, and showed the idea. And they had their hands full. It was a integration nightmare. And we showed the idea. I was just an advisor to the company at the time, and they said, "This is brilliant. This is the future. We can't get to it for years." And 8 years later, in fact, we signed a deal with Morgan Stanley. So basically, just to describe what LifeYield does, we look across multiple accounts. We do tax optimization in 8 different ways. We maximize the accumulation of wealth and we maximize the distribution of wealth, hyper-personalized, pardon the buzzword, but we actually do that. We haven't met too many others that do. And so in Morgan Stanley, those that may be familiar with intelligent withdrawals, that's us, might be familiar with their GPS where they talk about asset location. Also, it's in their in their proposal system. We do that. We quantify the benefit of that dollars and cents. And so we maximize retirement income. And we're now doing that with many of the largest firms in our industry. But the leap was from going from multi-account, this complementary investment analysis we talked about earlier.
Right.
How do you sell a diversified portfolio to how do you not only sell it, but grow it more rapidly through tax optimization and get up more income over time. And so we're busy at all of that.
Awesome. People currently in your sphere, like now that you're in this fintech space and or things you're doing outside the space to remain energized, informed, and just thinking about the world?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So right now we're working with most of the major firms in some fashion or means. Not all with contracts just yet, but very much on the way. We're also working with partners. So Money Guide Pro is a good example of a partner. We're early stage conversations in some other like-minded firms. What we find basically is financial planning is fundamentally important, but it's not connected to implementation.
Right.
As it stands today. We're that connection. So that's why we're finding that we're doing a lot of work with companies that have planning capabilities. But at the end of the day, if you have a plan and you don't do anything about it, then it's just a plan.
Sure.
Or, and let's be honest, for a lot of advisors, they'll do a plan and then sell them what they're going to sell them anyway. And so really the role we wind up playing is we end up showing how to implement it in what we call a risk smart, tax smart way. So we don't do the risk, but we capture the risk parameters. And then because anytime you adjust risk, you're going to have a trade, which means you're going to have a taxable event. We make sure it's done in a smart way. We're also working with a lot of annuity companies. So we have Jackson National, Guardian, Northwestern Mutual, New York Life, a bunch of them. And then also working on some interesting things going on with PPL and Orion and some others. So lots of interesting things. So while we're in the fintech space, technically, we're given my background where I know annuities and I know SMA, UMA, and so on, advisory. What we're really about is how do you bring those together? You've heard me often talk about the confluence of digital and human advice. I could not be a bigger believer. So to your original question, what do I do? What keeps me energized? I spend a lot of time. I blog on LinkedIn. I write columns for Investment News and FA Mag, and my colleagues doing some of the same. My colleague, Allison Dorosky, who writes about Social Security. My colleague, Paul Samuelson, who writes about the economy and taxes and inflation and that kind of stuff. I'm very active on social media, appear on this podcast, as well as hosting my own. So I very purposely, and I hate the expression, which is thought leadership, but I think of what I'm doing as thought leadership in action. How do you make something happen? So what energizes me is sharing this accumulated knowledge all through listening, talking with people like yourself and others, and really try to advance the industry. I get to do that with LifeYield, what we offer. We don't have a competitor directly. We have firms that do pieces of what we do, but really putting it all together is very complex, very evolved, very sophisticated. And what we find is that we don't really have a competitor because they can do pieces of what we do, but not the whole thing. And they can't connect to the other capabilities. They like trading, like planning, household level rebalancing, like transitions, like all the different stuff you got to do. We do all that stuff. So we are that leader that we always wanted to be. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm in a prominent pulpit cheering our industry on, because we work with lots of our so-called competitors to make what I'm describing, make it real.
So listening, right? And to be such a prolific thought leader, I'll use the phrase, and to put it into action the way you do, I imagine you also have to draw some energy and inspiration from completely outside the professional realm. Is that accurate? And
Yeah.
or do you bifurcate the two?
No, I probably work too much still. It's just because for me, it's not work. It's fun. I really enjoy writing. I enjoy reading. So one of the things I try to make sure I do, and a shout out to my friend, John Connors, who's not of our industry, although he owns a company in Boston called Boathouse. It's a large digital agency. He and his firm did the Total Merrill program way back in 2003, worked with people like John Thiel and Riley Etheridge way back in the day. And that was, and actually was James Gorman's brainchild, at least the concept, they named it. And he and Paula Polito developed it. Rich Annister, who's actually now at InvestNet, were all part of that team that developed Total Merrill, which if you look at the history, and I'm a bit of a historian on all this stuff, that was the groundbreaking churn from just selling products funds at the time and whatever, to planning and estate planning and banking and lending and all the different parts that really are part of what our business is today. So back to my friend, Mr. Connors. See, he started all that. See, he and I become good friends. We're involved in a not-for-profit together, have become good friends. And I love talking to him because he just, and we talk a lot about this sort of stuff. Another friend in common, Steve Gresham, he and I talk frequently. He's one of the, I think, great minds in our business. And so I get excited by ideas and about how to bring them about, not just talk about them, but do them. And so there's a few people around that I go on my way. You're another. I love chatting with you because you're thinking, you're not just going with the status quo, impressed with what Flex is becoming. And so I like to be in touch and frankly use it. John Thiel's on our board. He's former head of Merrill.
Right.
Love to chat with him. Riley Etheridge is another way I'm fortunate enough to stay in touch with. Just Michael Learsh at Wells Fargo Advisors, who actually worked with those folks at Merrill. Eric Lordy, who's now at JP Morgan, was at Morgan Stanley. And another great friend is Rose Palazzo, maybe the smartest of all of us in terms of putting all this together. So that's where I spend my time, talking about stuff and talking about what's working and what's not working. So I have a decided advantage in that I have a lot of people I really admire and respect, and I put them all in the category of mentor to me, and someone might even return the favor and say the same.
There's a book out there called Lattice. There's a couple of them, but there's a book out there called Lattice Work Investing. And it strikes me that you're applying similar principles through thought leadership. When you think about a lattice work, any one piece of that lattice is pretty weak, irrelevant, in fact. But when you start to strap together multiple pieces over larger and larger sections, like you become more informed, you become more valuable to each part of the lattice. So it's cool. Jack, always a pleasure. I see this bridging, if you're up for it, into multiple future episodes. We're going to wrap it here for today. So I want to say thank you to Jack, and a big thank you to our listeners for your time, allowing us to occupy and potentially enhance your mind space. Both are valuable to us. Jack is a super source of inspiration and information, bringing the two together articulately and many times with a great story wrapped around it. We're a work in progress as people, and a podcast, we like to say. If you picked up anything of interest, please subscribe, leave a rating and review. And until next time, keep looking for and creating your own inflection points. Jack, thank you again.
My pleasure. It was really enjoyable. Thanks so much.
The information contained in this recording is provided as is for educational and informational purposes only and should not serve as the basis for any trading or investing decisions. Flex Networks makes no representations and disclaims all express, implied, and statutory warranties of any kind to any viewer, listener, or other third party. Neither Flex Networks nor any of its affiliates make any endorsement of any particular company, security, product, or financial strategy, and nothing contained in this recording should be construed as investment advice. Investors should undertake their own due diligence and carefully evaluate companies before investing.